Last episode, we needed to find a way to fit a 3-layer plywood tenon inside a 3-layer plywood mortise. I had thought that there would be no issues since I was missing 2 glue layers that reside between the mortise and the tenon. That minor amount of space should allow the tenon to slide in. I found out that, although it makes sense, there are small variances in the thicknesses, even within the same sheet of plywood. I also noted that the variances in the saw marks and the glue-up positioning on the tenon caused the tenon to be slightly too high. Individual layers had no issue being inserted into the mortise, but the 3 layers did not fit. The summation of all the inconsistencies led to an end product that didn't fit well. I ended up having to hand plane the tenons until everything was nice and even and smooth. I also rounded the edges of the tenons to allow some variance in the mortise corners. In the end, I got the rails pounded in, but it's not coming apart anytime soon. I will still have the ability to take it apart and move it, but I don't expect to do that too often. Because the mortise and tenon joints are quite tight, I think I will probably have to pay attention to the corners and edges of the joints to see if they separate plywood layers over the long term. Let me know in the comments what your prediction is. This Stanley plane was purchased at an estate auction. I bought this and 3 other planes that were my neighbor's. He was a 92-year-old man that passed away 10 or 15 years ago. I spent a few days here and there talking to him about times gone by. He had worked for the cement company in town and told me about the history of the limestone quarry that is 2 blocks from my home. In 1927, it flooded unexpectedly and very quickly when a spring was hit. Now it's one of the springs that the town's water supply comes from. At any rate, this particular plane of his turns out to be a 1872 to 1873 Stanley Bailey Type 3 hand plane. The date is determined by several sites that specialize in the collection and dating of historical tools. It had a fairly wide throat, so I turned it into what's called a scrub plane. Scrub planes are used to run across the grain in a slightly scalloped cut. You can even out a twist or a warp in a board very quickly, since it can remove a lot of material. This did involve reshaping the blade to a slightly convex profile before resharpening. I also roughly carved out a back handle, since the original had a crack in it. I personally like a much thicker handle on a plane anyway, since I have large hands. Time to get rid of this rolling cart in this build. I don't know who would have built such a thing. I think it'll work just fine as its intended purpose, rather than trying to make it do double duty as a workbench. Also, the blue table currently handles my offcuts for my table saw. It sags in the middle and is not that sturdy. I may rebuild it at some point as a tabletop in another part of the house. What it ends up as remains to be seen.
Oh, baby girl. We'll make it last all night long.
I picked up this hammer at a pawn shop. Someone had made this from a piece of round stock steel. They drilled a hole through the center and welded a knurled piece of thick pipe on both ends. It weighs 10 pounds and has been one of the most useful hammers I've ever owned. At this stage, the base weighs around 180 pounds. With the top being made up of 42 layers at 4 inches thick, it should make for a nice hefty bench. Now we are on to design the end pieces and the tusks for the tenons. For the end pieces to be placed in the tenon, I have decided on 13.5 degrees. I just eyeballed a slight angle change and determined the final angle on my miter saw based upon my arbitrary pencil line. This 13.5 degrees will be enough offset from the original 19 degrees to give a good bind on the tusk as it gets pounded in. I can use an offcut to set both of my angles and use that for marking each of my 4 end pieces. For my tusks, I have a few pieces of hard maple that will work nicely. Since the straight side of my tusk rides along the 19-degree leg, I can measure the gap between my leg and the end piece that I have temporarily placed in the end of the tenon. I chose to bandsaw the angle and then just hand plane up to my mark manually. I also had to plane the thickness just a touch, since the plywood is slightly less than 3/4 of an inch. Now it's time to glue up and screw the end pieces in. Clamping the end pieces in helps hold everything tight and in place. 4 screws on both sides will provide extra strength in the end piece, since the tusk and joint pressure will ride directly on the end piece. Once even one tusk goes into place, These leg joints are extremely sturdy. Thanks for coming along with me on this build today. I hope it was an enjoyment to you. Next week, we have to work on the end vise setup. That preparation needs to take place before gluing up sections of the top. It will be easier to do that ahead of time since we can assemble and disassemble pieces at will. Thank you for watching. Have a nice day.